All right, hello everyone. It's about noon, so let's get started here. I'm David Harvey, the first post vice president of the DC post. I'm here with Bree Beal, our program director, and who is hosting these teams webinar. And we'll be also monitoring the chat throughout the event in case you have any problems. So thanks for joining us today. We had over 100 people register. Looks like we've got around 18 or so, 20 or so coming in. So maybe we'll have more coming in down the line. But let's get going here. It's my pleasure to invite you all to our January, Happy New Year, January 1st Friday luncheon session with Damon Hacker of Vestige Digital Investigations, who will be presenting on CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certifications, a primer. Our first Friday sessions is to provide you is our provision to you through our SME's commitment to offer AEC community effective training, development, and networking. The DC Post is helping to sustain the future of the profession with these monthly educational focused sessions to deliver topical and relevant content to our industry. And thank you all for joining us today for this program. And so anyway, so everyone's got their videos off, so that would be great to leave them off while the presentation is going on. And then if you would like to ask a question at the end, you can turn yourself on as well. And then be sure you have yourself on mute in case, so we don't get any interference. There'll be time for Q&A at the end of the question as well. And so we're glad you're here to join us. And we'd first like to start off first with a moment of silence. Oops, excuse me, you have an open mic somewhere.
And listen to know the difference.
Let's see. Oh, there we go. Great. I'd like to start off with a moment of silence to remember our active duty military, first responders, and all who are in need of our care and thoughts throughout the world right now. All right, thank you. Now please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors of the DC Post, AMT, Black & Veatch, Christopher Consultants, Consigli, Gannett Fleming, Spinoli, Stantec, WSP, Jacobs, Woods Peacock, AB Facility Services, Arche Consulting, and Stanley Consultants. We truly appreciate your support. We would not be able to put on these events without you, and we're grateful for your outstanding sponsorship. Your support helps us meet our society's goals, which include providing excellent content for our members, industry and government engagement, building resilient communities, connecting with future leaders through our students and young members programs, enriching the STEM pipeline, and preparing our military and veterans for a life after the service. If you're not already a DC Post sponsor and would like to support our post with an annual sponsorship, we'd love to add your name to this list for future programs and events next year. Please visit our website for more information about sponsorship levels and how you can give back to the community through the DC Post sponsorship. All right, now it's time for our main program. Right here is the learning objectives. I'm not going to read these before. I'm sure you may have seen these when you signed up. But please note there will be a one professional development hour from the SME DC Post. So you should look for an email from SME DC and the Eventbrite for this after the event concludes. All right. So while I do, so the introductions we have here, I'm going to introduce Damon. Damon is the president and CEO and owner of Vigil Digital Investigations, a leading technology company specializing in cybersecurity, digital forensics, and electronically stored information. He brings more than 30 years of experience in this arena, including a background in IT security and auditing. Damon is an in-demand speaker on local, state, and national levels. He speaks on the subjects of DoD CMMC, cybersecurity compliance, IT security, IT auditing, computer fraud, white-collar crime, data breach, non-competent, and intellectual property theft. He earned his MBA from the Weatherhead School of Management and undergraduate degree from Case Western Reserve University. He is a member of SAME, Certified Information Systems Auditor, has a cybersecurity nexus fundamentals certification from the Information Systems Audit and Control Association, and is a cybersecurity maturity model certification registered practitioner for DoD cybersecurity compliance. Damon, thanks for joining us today, and I'd like to turn the program over to you now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that introduction. As Captain Harvey said, my name is Damon Hacker. I couldn't have picked a better name for myself. I noticed Michael Brown, you'd picked up on that as well. Yes, I think it was destiny. I had to do this from there. So yeah, the topic for the day is really going to be about CMMC 2.0. You know, I'm going to give you a lot of information. I'm going to kind of blow through this stuff, but I do monitor the chat sessions and that kind of stuff as well. So if you want to go ahead and put those in there, that's fine. But we will try to leave a little bit of time at the end for those questions as well from there. So one of the things that I'm going to kind of point out, there's a lot of confusion right now in regards to CMMC, a lot of different opinions, that kind of stuff. We're also in an interesting place right now where the DoD has actually been very quiet about things with CMMC because it's in the federal rulemaking process, and by that they need to kind of be mum about that. But one of the things that we kept hearing was there's nothing moving along with CMMC. And nothing could be further from the truth on that. And in fact, this little tidbit that the C3PAO audits, and if you don't know what C3PAO is, we'll learn more about that, but suffice it to say, the audits have actually begun. And there's been several of them that have been conducted through something called the Joint Surveillance Program, which we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the point is that CMMC is here, and it affects basically anybody who's in the defense industrial base there. That's about 221,000 companies that it's going to affect. And we're going to learn more about the levels and how it affects different levels and that kind of stuff. It is a evolution of NIST 800-171, and we'll talk about that. But what was interesting about that is after the interim rule came out for NIST 800-171 in November of 2020, a year after that, of those 221,000 companies, only 5,500 had actually entered a score. And while that has improved since that time frame, it's still very much behind in terms of private companies' compliance with it. One of the other things that we'll talk about is the scoring system in this. It's a perfect score is a positive 110. That number we're going to be repeating several times throughout the presentation. And the lowest score is a minus 203. The average score being about a minus 134. So even there, you can kind of see, even for those that have been entering their scores, there's a lot of work to be done on that yet from there. So we're up to somewhere around 27,000, maybe 30,000 companies have self-reported on that right now. Something else that people need to be aware of, and it plays into some of the changes that were made with 2.0. Specifically, version 2.0 was released November 4th of last year, of 2021, 2 years ago. I forgot to move to 2023 here. So a little bit over a year ago, it was introduced. A month prior to version 2.0 coming out, the Department of Justice announced an increased enforcement around cybersecurity-related fraud by federal contractors. The two items at the very bottom are probably the ones that would affect those companies most, which is the misrepresentation of where they're at in their cybersecurity practices and protocols, and the failure to report an incident once that's been identified. I don't know if this was just pure coincidence. I kind of think not. But one of the big changes with 2.0 came in from the standpoint that those companies that fall at the lowest level of compliance actually are self-reporters. And basically with this announcement saying they're going to increase that enforcement and some of the penalties and that kind of stuff that go along with it, I kind of think that they went hand in hand. Something else to know, and again, just more evidence of the fact that this is moving forward and that kind of stuff, is in June of 2022, some guidance came out in regards to NIST 800-171 compliance. And the biggest thing that came out about that is that they're now conducting spot audits. So those companies who've put their information into the supplier performance risk system as they were supposed to are now following, have the opportunity to have a surprise or a spot audit performed on that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides from there. So where are we at in the process? So it is in the federal rulemaking process. It went into that in November of 2021. Generally speaking, that process is about a 9 to 24 month window. I've been saying actually since about December of 2021 that I anticipated it to come out in about middle of next year. We've received some confirmation of that from what's known as the Cyber AB, or the accreditation body, as well as from the DoD, just in terms of where it's at in the federal rulemaking process. So kind of projecting it out. We're anticipating the interim final rule to come out sometime around March or April of this year, which means that probably within about 60 days after that, there's a possibility of that you'll start seeing some contracts with that out. What's interesting about that is under the original version of CMMC, it was expected to be everybody was supposed to have it in place by 2026. So we're actually several years ahead of that. So it really pushed up the timeline on that. So I want to make sure people are kind of aware of that from there. And really the thing that I want to kind of push to everybody is the time to act is now, because in general, it's going to take companies some time to go through the process from there. So why are we here? I'm going to give a brief overview of CMMC, what it is, what you need to get started today, leave you with some resources and that kind of stuff from the standpoint of assistance. And then the back part of it, it's going to get crammed in there, but I'm going to try to give you some real world pointers on things that need to be done from CMMC side of things. One of the things that I often get as a kind of pushback on this program is why is the DoD doing this to me? Why am I being singled out as somebody in the private sector to do this? And the reality is I want to kind of step back from that, because you are not alone, and it's not something that the DoD is doing to us, right? If we look at cybersecurity in general, obviously it's been increasing, and it's going to continue to increase. The problems, the attacks, and that kind of stuff are going to continue to increase before it gets better, right? The other part to it is, and this is, I want to leave this analogy in your mind just to kind of prove this, is that I want you to think about driving into your neighborhood tonight, and not 1, not 2, not 5 burglars, but 50 burglars are going up and down the road, rattling the windows, knocking on the doors, checking to see if anybody's home, seeing if there's a way into the house. Now, obviously, if that was happening in the real world, we would never stand for that. But the reality is that's exactly what's occurring in the cyberspace all the time. We just don't see it, right? And so again, what is happening is there's soft underbellies for a company, or on a new vulnerability gets discovered or something along that lines, and all of a sudden the bad guy's in from there. The other thing is, and this is not just around the DoD, and this is why I say it's not, we're not being singled out, is every industry that we deal with is going through what I'm going to call third-party risk management. Customers, suppliers, that kind of stuff, reaching out to their supply chain and saying, hey, we share information with you. Some of it's confidential, some of it's trade secret, some of it's just personal identifiable information, that kind of stuff. We share information with you. What is it that you're doing to protect that information so that we can measure our risk? In a sense, that's what CMMC is all about. And again, this is happening in every industry across the sectors from there. So it's not something that's unique to just the DoD. But here is what's unique to the DoD, is that this is costing us as Americans a lot of money, and also has a national security implication from it, from there. So this was a quote that came directly from the accreditation body, or what's known as the Cyber AB now. And that's is the reason why the DoD is actually putting this in place. So the accreditation body is a sole source. They have a contract with the DoD. It's separate and distinct from the department. And they were charged with doing two things: creating a certification and creating an ecosystem around that certification to support it from there. And so down at the bottom, you can see there's several different members of those. You as an organization, as you're going through this, you are what's known as an OSC, or an organization seeking certification. There are companies that are helping people become certified, which are a registered provider organizations or practitioner organizations. And then there's actual assessors. And we're going to talk much more about these three right here: the C3PAOs, the actual assessors, and the RPOs, registered practitioner organizations from there. So you got a little bit of flavor from the introduction, but now that I've got kind of your attention, I want to give you a little bit of understanding of who we are so that you know where this information is coming from. So we are a cybersecurity compliance company. We've been doing this work for a couple decades now. We are, in fact, part of the ecosystem. We are what's known as an RPO, or a registered practitioner organization, which basically means that we have registered practitioners on staff who've gone through additional training, testing, and are bound by a professional code of ethics all around CMMC. We stay up to date on this all the time. So at a minimum, we're having monthly conversations with the accreditation body, attending town halls, doing things along that lines. I do a lot of speaking, and I do a lot of speaking for SAME, both at the national, regional, and local posts like we're doing today from there. So been around it, been doing the cyber for a long time. Everything that I talk about in this presentation today is because of my practical experience doing this, working with clients. We've probably got about 50 projects going on right now on that, and it's real world information. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Just wanted to kind of give you that idea. So what is CMMC? It's a unified cybersecurity standard that measures maturity, right? And it measures maturity specifically around cybersecurity. I hinted at this earlier. It is an expansion of a program that's been around for a little while called NIST 800-171. And it applies to anybody in the defense industrial base with one exception. The exception is if you are commercial off the shelf. So if you're COTS, it's exempted, but otherwise, if you receive information known as FCI, federal contract information, basically if you got enough information to bill the government, you've got the FCI, or another classification there, controlled unclassified information, or CUI. It applies to primes and subcontractors equally. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get through the specific standards and that kind of stuff, especially as it relates to your supply chain. If you're a subcontractor, it applies to you and your supply chain as well from there. So just because you're not a prime doesn't mean that you don't fall under this from there. So NIST 800-171 has been around for a little while. It was actually introduced in 2016 with compliance needed by 2017. I'll be honest, it's pretty easy to comply with. There are 110 controls. There's that number again. I said it would have, we would talk about. There's 110 practices or controls that need to be in place. But for the most part, it's a self-certification. There are some companies that fall under, having to have it audited and that, but for the most part, it's self-certification. And technically speaking, to be compliant with the DFARS clause that brought this in, you have to have three things: a self-attestation about those 110 controls and whether you've got those in place or not, or where are you at in the process; a document known as a System Security Plan, or SSP. That documents all of the controls that you have. And then the plan of action and milestones are those items that you don't have in place yet, but here's what you're doing about it. Here's the action plan, and here's the milestones and timeframes in terms of when you're expected to have that done. If you have those three things in place, you are compliant with DFARS 252, 204, 7012, which is the DFARS clause that brought in NIST 800-171. Okay. Again, relatively easy to comply with because technically speaking, you could say, yep, I attest to the fact that I've got these 2 controls in place, put those on the SSP, and the other 108 I'm working on, right? Would recommend that as a strategy, but it is, that's what you would need to have. So what was wrong with that? Why do we need to, come up with CMMC? The real reason really comes down to failure to engage. And there were reasons why that happened. One of the things that, the DoD heard loud and clear from companies that were trying to put NIST 800-171 in was it's a one-size-fits-all approach. Whether you are Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, AECOM, or any of the others, you had the same 110 controls that Bob's, welding company that has 2 employees and no computer and receives no controlled unclassified information had to have in place. Right? So from the 221,000 DIB members out there, technically speaking, the vast majority of those are likely going to be at the lowest level because they're only dealing with federal contract information. And as such, the new model actually accommodates that. From the DoD side of things, some of the criticisms were the fact that it was a self-certification, right? We all learned in 3rd grade that when we grade our own papers, we tend to do much better, right? Well, the DoD was seeing that same thing. And I'm not saying it was because of any kind of malfeasance or anything. It was just the nature of, how we are. We tend to overestimate how good we're really doing with things from there. And then the other thing that was a problem is under NIST 800-171, yes, there's penalties if you ended up suffering an incident and it was discovered. And then when they came in to actually investigate it, they found that those controls weren't in place. But the damage has already been done, right? That controlled unclassified information has already leaked out. And so that was a big criticism from there. And CMMC kind of turns that around a little bit more. So just to kind of give you a flavor of some of the kinds of things that, you could have if you weren't compliant, certainly contract termination, there were some financial implications of it. And if it was really egregious, there could actually even be some criminal fraud with that. So we put in CMMC, we've got NIST 800-170, I'm sorry, we put in NIST 800-171, we've got CMMC coming up. I mentioned the spot audits before, and the DoD has conducted somewhere between about 200 and 250 of these spot audits. They shared a couple months ago some of the results of the first ones that were conducted from there, and there's maybe 17 or 20 or some on this one. The numbers in blue, and I know you can't really see it, but I want to just kind of, kind of level set here, is the numbers in blue are those companies' self-reported scores, right? So we have 80 and 68 and 108 and 100. Here's a perfect score at 110 and that, right? Those were the scores that were entered by those companies into the supplier performance risk system. Then when the spot audit was conducted and the DoD came in to do it, the orange is what that company really was at, right? So here we've got somebody who reported 80, but when DIBCAT came in, it was minus 117. And in fact, of all of these, there was only one where it actually went up from here, okay? So in fact, when you looked at the top ones that they did, the average score that was reported was a positive 56, again, out of 110. When DIBCAT performed their assessment, the average was minus 57. That's more than a 100-point spread, right? Now, why do I think that happened? I don't think that was because you had a lot of malicious intent, the people going out there and just saying, oh, yeah, I've got these things in place. I think more likely than not, as evidenced by some of the projects we've worked on and just my understanding of these kind of compliance regimes, comes down to 2 things: misinterpretation of what the requirement actually is asking for on a control by control basis. You read it, you look at it and go, yeah, we're doing that, and it may be that you completely misunderstood what was there. The second thing, closely related, is yeah, we're doing that, but not really. You don't really know what the expectations of the DoD were. And as a result of that, I think that's what happened in many of these, is that, again, there was no ill intent. It was just that people were looking at it and going, yeah, we think we're complying with it. And then they learned and realized what DoD really meant by compliance with it. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about that as I go through this. So CMMC, just to give you kind of at its core level what it is, the new version 2.0, again, was released in November of 2021. There's 3 maturity levels. Level 1 is the lowest level, 3 is the highest. It's a progressive approach from there. Level 1 is the basic safeguarding of federal contract information, all right? If you deal with controlled unclassified information, you will automatically be at least at a level 2, and there's a possibility you'll be at a level 3. We'll talk about what gets you from 2 to 3 a little bit later from there. My experience has been that almost every company that is a member of SAME is seeing controlled unclassified information, and therefore is going to be at least at a level 2. Now, you may not recognize that it's controlled unclassified information. It may not be marked that way, but some of the things that we generally see would be things like FOUL, right, for official use only, controlled, sensitive but unclassified. There's a whole range of markings that have been traditionally used by different parts of the agencies to designate that it's controlled unclassified information from there. So you might be seeing it and not even recognize or know it. I will say in the past 6 months, I've seen a much stronger response from the DoD in terms of the markings and a lot of corrections and that kind of stuff. So even we've heard companies that, hey, we've been receiving this kind of information for years, and it's always been marked something different. It's now showing up as CUI from there. So check your assumptions on that from there. This is a set of all kinds of different cybersecurity frameworks that are out there. And a framework is just a collection of best practices, right? Starts from weaker all the way over to stronger. You can see that NIST 800-171 is, kind of right of center. So it's not the most robust kind of stuff, right? These are the kinds of things you would expect to have in place if you had, classified information, top secret, that kind of stuff in here. But it's pretty substantial in terms of that from there. When we look at the different levels, level 2, that controlled unclassified information, perfectly aligns with NIST 800-171. In fact, level 2 under the new version, under 2.0, it's the same 110 controls that you've had to have in place since the beginning of 2016. Now, if you're not dealing with controlled unclassified and you find yourself at a place where you don't have to be level 2 or higher, it actually became much, much easier for you as an organization. But if you're at a level 2, it's the same as what you were already supposed to have in place for the last several years. And then level 3 does move the ticker a little bit even further to the right up here. So at level 3, you're going to have more controls you need to deal with. The good news is that it's a progressive framework, meaning that it builds upon itself. The first 17 controls of NIST 800-171 are what needs to be handled at level 1. And then you add an additional 93 controls on to be 110. And if we go to level 3, it's going to be a total of 145 practices or controls that need to be in place from there. So you can actually start and focus on your level 1 items, then start adding your stuff in level 2. You get to level 2. And if you got to the place where down the road you ended up having to be at a level 3, everything that you've done, you get credit for it. You just have to add the additional controls onto it from there. So that's good. Probably one of the major changes between NIST 800-171 and CMMC is the introduction of the C3PAO, the outside assessing organization. So the C3PAO stands for the CMMC third-party assessing organization, not to be confused with the Star Wars character C3PO. See, I can't even say it, C3PO from there. As I mentioned earlier, if you are at level 1, one of the changes they made to it is it's a self-attestation. It's the same self-attestation that you had to do under NIST 800-171. The one thing they've added to it is that needs to be done by an officer of the corporation. Going back to my slide at the opening about the Department of Justice's increased enforcement around fraud, I think that's clearly to make sure that it's being, putting somebody on the hook for that from there. At level 2 and level 3, it is no longer a self-certification. You have to have that outside entity come in and actually perform the assessment from there. The other thing that they've done is, whereas under NIST 800-171, there are penalties if you didn't have the stuff in place, the way that CMMC is going to work is that you're not going to be permitted to be awarded a contract unless you have the certification for that level, right? Or higher, right? So if a contract comes out and says it's a level 2, you will need to be certified at level 2 or level 3 to be able to be awarded that contract, right? If you're a level 1, if it's a level 1 contract, as long as you're 1, 2, or 3, you can bid and be awarded that contract. There's a couple of caveats we might get to a little bit later on that, but suffice it to say, if you are a prime, you're going to be, required to be at that level or higher from there. So, yeah, I already kind of talked about this. It was introduced. It accelerates the time frame, right? Again, we're thinking about it from the standpoint of it being in place mid-year this year from there. So something else, though, that you need to be aware of, if you've kind of not been paying attention to what's been going on with NIST 800-171 and CMMC. I mentioned the interim rule that came out in November of 2020. That introduced 3 new DFARS clauses. They're all of the same family, right? So 252.204, 7012 was the original NIST 800-171. We've got 7019, 7020, and 7021 that came into effect. Basically, it's what adopted CMMC. 7020 is the requirement that you post your score into the supplier performance risk system, methodology, how you calculate it and all that kind of stuff, and from there. So this was kind of a stopgap measure that the DoD put in place because under version 1.0, it was supposed to be a progressive rollout from there. Tom, you asked the question, to be certified by C3PAO third-party audit for a level 2 cert, do you have to meet all 110? Yes, there is. Yeah, you have to have all 110 in place. There is there's a cure period afterwards. So if you go through the assessment and there are deficiencies, there's you can put in a plan of action and milestones. There's a couple of caveats with that. The first caveat is it's time bound. It can't be more than 180 days out. So you would have to remediate any deficiencies by that period of time. The second thing is there's going to be a minimum score that you would have to qualify to even have a POAM. On that one. We don't know what that score is going to be yet, but I have a pretty good guess as to what it's going to be because of the second or the third thing that I'm going to say, which is that there are certain controls that if you don't have them in place, it doesn't matter. You can't pass it. Those controls are probably going to be the maturity level 1, the 17 controls from there. And then there's 40 controls that are part of level 2. We call it the big 40. Those are ones that have a penalty that's greater than just 1 point if you don't have it in place. If you don't know how the methodology works, the perfect score is 110, right? You've got 110 practices, you get 1 point for each one of those. For every control you don't have in place, you lose points. 53 of those, you lose 1 point. 57 of them, you lose more than 1 point. Most of those are you lose 5 points. There's a few where you lose 3 points or that. So that's how you can get a negative score there. My guess is the DoD is looking at it and saying, if you don't have the top 17 and the big 40 in place, then you're gonna, those are the ones that you're not eligible to move on for that. So, all right. Let's see. So some ideas in terms of like, where you're going in the on the journey here for that. So generally speaking, our experience has been not only in CMMC, but other regimes like this, whether it's ISO 27001, which was one of those certifications or one of the frameworks that I mentioned there, HIPAA, PCI, HITRUST, any of those kind of things, is it's going to take most organizations probably about 9 to 12 months to go through the entire process when you consider getting yourself self-assessed or assessed by an outside entity to kind of know where you're at, remediate the things that you need to have in place, then hiring the C3PAO to come in and perform that cure period certification process. I mean, that the CMMC, the accreditation body's already, kind of told people, expect that process just in itself to take about 6 months if you're ready to go today, on that process from there. So what are some of the things that we have seen? What are some of the things that companies are getting stuck on, right? Well, some of them are pretty they didn't know about the requirement, right? I kind of find it hard to believe that most companies don't know about it today just because there's been a lot of hype and that kind of stuff. But believe it or not, we have conversations all the time where a company doesn't know that it's even, out there, and that they haven't really, started with a plan or that kind of stuff from there. The two at the bottom are ones that I feel most companies do tend to have some issues with. And it goes back to what I said in terms of the differences between when the companies were self-reporting and when they were, when the DIBCAT came in to do that. And again, it comes down to not understanding what the requirements are and really underestimating where that organization is, on that one. The framework itself, when you look at those 110 controls, and I'm going to stick with the 110 controls because for the most part, most companies who have to deal with level 2 or 3, most of the companies are going to end up being at level 2. So you're going to have the 110 controls in place. When you look at that, and this is something that you need to understand is that it's not all technical. Only about half of those controls are what we would refer to as technical controls. They're the kind of controls where you would turn to your IT people and say, get these things done, right? There's a whole bunch of other ones, about half of what's remaining, which are more of policy driven. And then there's some that are procedural, things. So there's going to be some changes that need to happen within the organization, or at least for the organization where those individuals are dealing with controlled unclassified information, right? So there are possibilities of what we call enclaving, right? Setting aside and cordoning off your CUI environment and only those people who are dealing with it. You have to apply those 110 or whatever number of controls to that area, that enclave from there. So that's kind of what that looks like. In essence, what you need to do is address each one of those controls, right? By addressing it, I mean documenting it in a system security plan, right? So this is what we've done from a design side of things. Actually, have a policy that addresses the control in some fashion, and put that control in place. That control needs to be practiced, meaning that you're following it. And then because of the fact that this is a evidence-based assessment, you're going to need to be able to prove that you're practicing it, okay? So that's basically, kind of the formula for what you're going to need to do to get everything in place. And then, of course, hire the C3PAO to come in and conduct the assessment from there. So I've got a couple of slides, and they get a little bit into the technical side of things, into the weeds, but I'm doing it for a very particular reason because I want to demonstrate something here. If you're not familiar with the model itself, it's broken into 14 what's called capability domains or categories of controls, right? So you'll find a certain number of controls that are under the access controls, a certain number that's under awareness and training. It's there. The way that the controls are actually labeled is that capability domain is listed here. The control then has what maturity level this control fits in, right? If you see that this is a level 1 control, everybody's going to have that control in place. If it says it's a level 3 control and you're only going for level 2, you don't need to worry about that control. And then the last piece is just a carryover from the NIST 800-171. It's just the practice ID, okay? That's interesting, but that's not really what I wanted to kind of explain. But if we read that, like if I use this MP1, we know it's part of the media protection domain. It's at a level 2, and it's just 3.88, which is prohibit the use of portable storage devices when such devices have no identifiable owner, right? That's what the requirement is. Pretty straightforward. It means that if you find a USB device and it doesn't have information on it that who it is and what's on it, don't be sticking it in the computer because it could have malware on it, right? Makes sense, common sense. Okay, a lot of the controls are like that, but a lot of controls are not like that, right? And so here's just some examples of what I'm going to consider some of the easy controls, right? The first one there, do you authorize wireless access prior to allowing such connections? Well, I think we do. I don't know. If you've got a password that's required to get onto it, you've met that objective. Let's look at this one. Provide protection from malicious code at appropriate locations within the organization's systems. Now, normally, if this was more interactive and that kind of stuff in a live audience, I ask people to give me ideas of what that means, and I get answers all over the board. Someone in the thing usually says, "Well, do you have antivirus software?" And I'm like, "Yep, bingo, that's what that one means," right? Okay, keep that in mind. Let's move on. This is my very favorite control of the whole thing. Employ replay-resistant authentication mechanisms for network access to privileged and non-privileged accounts. If I were in a room of all IT people, I would probably venture to say that 95% of those in that room would be scratching their head saying, "I don't even know what that is." And yet, these are the people who we're calling upon to actually, implement these things, okay? Now, why are these written this way, right? I mean, why not just go and say, "Do you have antivirus software?" Or why don't we just say things like, "Are you using Windows Server with Kerberos authentication?" Because that fits this mold. Well, the reason being is that these have to be written in a very generic way so that it applies to everyone, right? Because every organization is going to look a little bit different. We've got people who are completely in the cloud. We have people who are, completely on premise. We've got some that the whole company, it applies to the whole company versus just the enclave and that kind of stuff. And so these things are written in such a way that, again, they can apply to the general masses. And the problem with that is that it's left to interpretation. What does this really mean, right? And again, going back to what I said before, that 100-point spread probably wasn't because of malfeasance as much as it was to just understanding what the heck the DoD actually means by this stuff, okay? So, using my rollerball there, it keeps going fast, sorry about that. So, there are ways that you can accomplish this, and I just want to kind of briefly talk about it. The only requirement under CMMC that you use an outside entity is you have to have a C3PAO to actually do the assessment. Otherwise, you can do this yourself. You can absolutely, do these things. Obviously, you're going to want to make sure that you understand what the framework is requiring and what the, expectations are right there. I know a fair number of companies who have turned to their outside IT provider to do this, and you can do that. Again, do they understand cybersecurity and do they understand the requirements? I have a number of people who turn to their cybersecurity provider, and that may work as well. The one thing I would say on that one is there are some definite nuances about dealing with CUI that a lot of times the cybersecurity providers don't know. You're going to want to make sure they are very familiar with the framework and what the requirements are around handling CUI from there. A little biased here in that, of course, but the RPO or the C3PAOs, that's what they're designed to do. They've gone through that additional training, that kind of stuff. And, there's a marketplace out there for people to look at and, choose an RPO. You can hire a C3PAO to do this work as well. The only thing is that C3PAO cannot be the same one that performs the assessment down the road. Okay, that's a conflict of interest from there. So a couple of places you might want to look from there. So let's talk about getting down to the brass nuts there in terms of brass tacks, in terms of getting this done. Like I said, there are resources available, from the ecosystem. There's going to be expense with this. Absolutely, is going to happen. You depending on what you guys have gotten put in place beforehand, how serious you've been, how up to date you've been with your technology, different things. But again, when you look at the framework, with only 50% of it being technical, right? Policies, procedures, that's relatively inexpensive to do. And even the technical, most of the controls don't require you to go out and buy new equipment, new hardware, get new services, and that kind of stuff. It might, again, depending on your circumstances, but a lot of it is actually just configuring things and thinking about it in a different way from there. So how do you do this? First off, you got to get the organization ready. You do not want to be in a place where you're finding out from the C3PAO that you don't have the controls in place, right? So get the organization ready, put those things into practice because you're going to need to have evidence for it. Then engage with the C3PAO, have that assessment performed, and then it's going to be submitted for accreditation from there. The framework, it's available out there, that URL, if you follow that. And again, we're going to make these slides available and that kind of stuff. So you'll have this, but if you go out there, you'll be able to pull down that there's a PDF document. There's also an Excel spreadsheet. You'll be able to find that. Granted, it's going to be written the way that those controls were that I demonstrated are, the kind of the terse language and all that kind of stuff, but it's out there and from there. So complete a pre-assessment, right? Make sure you're using that version from there and do an honest assessment of where you're at, right? Review the controls. Again, I recommend you review it for the design, for the execution, and we like to look at it and say, do you have the evidence to support that, right? I mean, you can have a perfectly designed control and you're not executing on it. Well, that's problematic. You could have a perfectly designed control, be executing on it, and not have an ability to actually produce any kind of evidence. So you're going to want to kind of assess that as well from there. So that design execution there, again, kind of keeping in mind whether you do this internally, just do you understand what the requirements are? And so, kind of my caveat there is that, if you were looking at spending any kind of money, I probably would recommend that this is the place that you want to do it from an outside company, if, or for somebody, a consultant or whatever, who knows the framework and what the what they are, what the meanings of the things are from there. You want to take that gap report and you want to then start prioritizing things to be able to remediate those, right? So use that plan, use that gap analysis and your plan of action and milestones to actually say, okay, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to get it done from there. Next thing, obviously, you're going to complete that remediation. You want to put all that stuff into place. Again, I highly recommend as you're going through this part of the process that you are already pre-anticipating what evidence you're going to want to collect and keep that as part of your equation from there. Scoping is a really important aspect of this. If you didn't pick up from my comment a little bit earlier, those 110, again, at level 2, those 110 controls need to be applied against whatever the environment is that you scope, right? So if you scope the entire environment, your entire IT, the whole company, every division, everything like that, and it's a complex environment, you need to have those 110 controls in place for that. Well, some of those controls are going to be arduous for you to work with non-DoD work on, right? So it may make some sense to create that enclave and really understand what is the scope, because at the end of the day, what CMMC is about is protecting controlled unclassified information. You need to know where that controlled unclassified information is, how it gets to that storage place, and how it's transmitted through the environment. That's your scope. That's where the controls need to be applied. That might be your whole company, that might not be, but you want to focus on that scoping, probably one of the most important things. Then document those controls. Again, that's going to end up in the system security plan or the SSP. This is the design, this is what you would do. Develop your policies around that. There's a couple of different ways I've seen it. I've seen sometimes where there's, multiple documents or a policy for each domain. I've seen some of them combined in one document. It doesn't matter. There's no standard way of doing that. You just need to have some policy to support what you're doing from there. You're not required. One of the changes they made under version 2.0 is they removed what were known as the maturity processes. So there were three things that you needed to have in addition. It was the policies, the procedures, and you need to have plans in place. They relaxed that, assuming that stands during rulemaking. You don't have to have those. You do still need to have the policies because of a requirement under NIST 800-171, and it's just good practice to have that as well from there. So you get all this done, you get it remediated, you're at a place where you got your policies in place, people are working on and that kind of stuff. I highly suggest you put a burn-in period going on there, right? Typically 60 to 90 days where you're running with those remediated controls and just kind of getting used to it. It does two things. First, we've designed this on paper, kind of in an ideal world. If you're at a place now where you've put it in practice and it's not really working for you, you can still make adjustments to it. The other thing, and it's even more important, is during that time frame, you're actually collecting the evidence, right? The guidance that's been given has been that the C3POs need to see a track record that that you've got these controls in place. In essence, we don't want that you're just putting it in place 2 weeks before the C3PO shows up. 60 to 90 days is a good period of time. 90 days, gives you a good baseline to know that, yeah, these controls have been in place. Around that time, then you're going to start talking with a C3PAO, get them engaged and in there. So just a little chart. You guys can read this afterwards. Suffice it to say, this is just kind of broken out in terms of a list of priorities and that kind of stuff, the way that we kind of attack things from there. Kind of gives you your best bang for the buck at the beginning. You're designing everything. You're then putting in things like the policies, the evidence collection, procedures if it needs to be done. But again, that burn-in period, engage the C3PAO there. After you've remediated, anything that needs to be looked at again, I highly recommend you go back and reassess those just to make sure that, now that you've put it in place, that it's working as designed, it meets the objective, that you've got the evidence, that kind of stuff. So dotting your I's and crossing your T's at this point in time. You're going to engage with that C3PAO. It is a marketplace that's out there, right? So if you go to the AB's website under marketplace, you can actually find all of the C3PAOs. You can also find the RPOs that are out there and some of the others that are part of the ecosystem from there. That choice of who you use for a C3PAO is yours. So I highly recommend that you use that marketplace. Talk to 3 or 4 of them, talk shop, figure out, get, any kind of past performance, their experiences, certainly cost, that kind of stuff, you want to kind of evaluate from there. So it was designed this way to be a kind of a competitive marketplace on that one. What's going to happen once you've completed the certificate, or once you've completed the assessment with the C3PAO, it's going to be submitted to the accreditation body, who is then going to issue, assuming that you've passed, will issue the certificate. From there, that certificate is good for 3 years and allows the organization to be to win those contracts from there. So I wasn't sure I'd have time for this. Looks like I do, and I'm going to leave a couple minutes for questions. That from there, there's one caveat that you might want to be aware of with level 2. Because I usually get this question sometimes. People will say, well, I heard or I read somewhere that some contracts will be self-certification at level 2. And that is, as of right now, that does appear to be that there's something called a prioritized and a non-prioritized contract. From there, be cautious of that. That is at least the way that we understand it today, that is a throttling mechanism that is supposed to probably disappear after the first set of audits and that kind of stuff. But it was there to be able to make sure that companies who really needed to go through the C3PAO process could. In that situation, if it's a self-attestation, then that would be an annual self-attestation instead of the 3-year from there. So CMMC's here. you're going to need to have that in place to be able to be to bid and be awarded contracts as a as a prime there. Everything we're seeing, the DoD is serious about cybersecurity. This isn't going away. Actually, I just saw something just this week again that kind of confirms it from there, and that's kind of evidenced by the fact that we've got the spot audits and DOJ enforcement on it from there. So. With that in mind, I will. Oh, I guess there's one question I'll answer here right there, and then Captain Harvey, I'll turn it back to you. So survived thus far, comparing notion as to what this is. Yeah, not without talking, a little bit more detailed, in terms of it, because it really could be wildly different for every organization in terms of the cost. Again, it depends on, what the scope is, where you are in terms of your adoption of technology, and that kind of stuff. There will be an expense. There'll be an expense for the C3PAO at a minimum, and then there'll be whatever your expense is from a certification, from a remediation side of things. From there, but be happy to do that. If you want to contact me, Bill, be happy to, or anybody on the call, be happy to kind of scope things out and have a discussion. So.
Hey, thanks, Damon, for your presentation today. It's very informative, and I suspect for many of the companies here who are having to comply with these requirements to make themselves be more competitive in the market for DoD. So, really appreciate your time today. We will have time for more questions. We're going to just give a brief overview of some upcoming events. So, Damon, if you want to stick around and others have questions for Damon, be happy to do that. So, we'll quickly again thank our sponsors here. Again, they've been great, and as we mentioned, if you'd like to become a sponsor, please find out some more information on our website. So, today is the deadline for nominating of the SME DC Post Awards. So if you'd like to nominate a colleague for an award, you can find out more about that at the web address here that's shown on the screen. The event's going to be held at the Press Club on January 26th. Encourage everyone that's available to come down. It's going to be a great event and with lots of great food and company. The next First Friday session is going to be the ESTCP. I kind of looked up that acronym, but I don't know, the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program for those who aren't in the know like me. Project overview, data diodes for facilities related controls and cyber system securities. So it's going to be on February 3rd, and registration is open now. And again, you'll get a PDH hour as you are for this event as well. If your company is interested in putting on a First Friday event, our schedule is currently open starting in July 2023. So feel free to reach out to us, and we can get you on the agenda for that, and you can share your knowledge with the other members of the organization, like Damon did today. One other thing is SAME National is hosting a career transition workshop. There's a virtual part that's beginning on January 17th, and there's an in-person one here in Maryland on the 14th through the 16th. It's a great event to seek out candidates who are going to trying to transition from the military into the private sector, and look forward to seeing many of the companies here, some of the companies here at that event. Myself, I'll be attending there with recruiting for the Indian Health Service. Also this month, the applications open for the 2023 STEM engineering and construction camps. These camps are held across the U.S. To attract high school students and get them interested in math, science, and engineering and technologies. Again, the website that's located there at the SAME National page has information about that. If you have a child who's in high school and you want to try to direct them towards engineering, it might be a good place to start to show them what it's all about. And finally, we've started planning our program for the spring, and we have quite a few events that are coming up here. There's another First Friday luncheon that's on the March 3rd. The SAME National Capital Week is going to be up here, I think, in Rockville, Maryland, the week March 27th through the 29th. And then we are going to be a small business conference is going to be held. The venue is still being decided. I think it's going to be in downtown DC. That announcement will be coming soon, probably within the next couple of weeks. On April 19th will be that event, and the JETSI conference, the national SAME National Conference, May 24th, May 2nd through the 4th. I think that's going to be in San Antonio, Texas. So lots of events for SAME coming up. So I think that's again, those are our sponsors. And again, I want to thank Damon. And if folks have questions for Damon, we'd be happy to field them. Either you can unmute yourself and ask them of Damon, or you can type them in the chat. And I think we can hang out here for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, something like that. If people have questions.
Yep. That works out. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks, Damon, for being here. Maybe if we'll meet each other at the Small Business Conference in person. I'll be
Good. Yeah.
scroll around there if you make it up down there. So
okay, perfect.
find out.
Sounds
All right.
good.
Thanks, Bree.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you at the next one.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks.